The stars had always called to humanity, and by the year 2147, they had finally answered that call in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. 3 star systems now carried the mark of human civilization, with colonies spreading across. Distant worlds like seeds scattered by a cosmic wind. Earth remained the heart of it all. But Mars had become a thriving world of red deserts turned green, and the stations orbiting Jupiter housed millions of souls who had never set foot on their ancestral homeworld. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Titan Relay Station, watching cargo ships drift past like fireflies against the darkness of space. She had spent 20 years in the United Earth Fleet, and she still felt that same sense of wonder that had gripped her as a child watching rockets launch from old video recordings. What she did not know, what no human knew, was that far beyond the edges of their explored space, an ancient civilization was watching them with growing concern. The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for over 8,000 years. 4,000 species had joined their coalition, bound together by laws older than human civilization itself, and the most important of these laws was simple. New species must be controlled before they could become a threat. Ambassador Velcroth of the Concord stood before the High Council, his tall gray form casting long shadows across the chamber floor. His species, the Velthari, had been among the founders of the Concord, and he took his responsibilities with the utmost seriousness. The humans have expanded beyond their home system, he announced, his voice carrying across the vast hall where representatives of hundreds of species had gathered. They have established permanent colonies in 3 star systems and show no signs of slowing their growth. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. This was not unusual, as primitive species often expanded rapidly in their early years, drunk on the power of space travel and blind to the dangers that lurked in the darkness between stars. We have sent the standard quarantine warning, Velcroth continued, a gravitational pulse encoded with universal mathematics, instructing them to halt their expansion and await contact from Concord representatives. The warning had been used for millennia. It was elegant in its simplicity, using the language of physics itself to communicate across the barriers of culture and biology. Any species advanced enough to detect it would understand its meaning, and any species that ignored it would face the consequences. But something had gone wrong, though no one in that chamber knew it yet. The warning had arrived at Earth during the worst solar storm in recorded history. For 3 weeks, the sun had raged with unprecedented fury, flooding the solar system with radiation that overwhelmed sensors and scrambled communications across all human worlds. In a monitoring station orbiting Mercury, a tired technician named James Chen had noticed an unusual reading amid the chaos of solar interference. The computer had flagged it as an anomaly, something that did not match any known natural phenomenon. James had stared at the data for a long moment, rubbing his exhausted eyes. He had been working double shifts for 2 weeks straight, and his mind was foggy with fatigue. The signal was strange. Yes, but it was buried under layers of solar noise, barely detectable above the background radiation. He had made a decision that would shape the fate of 2 civilizations. He logged the signal as anomalous background radiation and filed it away for later analysis. Later analysis that would never come, as the report was buried under thousands of other files generated during the solar emergency. The message that could have saved millions of lives vanished into a database, unread and forgotten. 50 years passed by the Concord's reckoning, and still humanity sent no response. Velcroth stood before the council once more, his expression grave. "They have not answered," he declared. "Their expansion continues without pause. They have now established colonies in 5-star systems and show increasing technological sophistication." The council's verdict was swift and unanimous. Humanity was marked as non-compliant. and the sterilization protocol was authorized. Commander Ithraini received her orders aboard the dreadnought Eternal Silence, the flagship of the Concorde's most feared fleet. She was a veteran of 12 sterilization campaigns, and she had never failed to complete her mission. Her species, the Kethmari, were perfect soldiers, cold, efficient, and utterly without mercy. They viewed the elimination of non-compliant species as a sacred duty, a necessary evil to preserve the peace of the galaxy. "How many ships?" her second-in-command asked. 300 dreadnoughts. Ithraini replied, studying the tactical displays that showed humanity's territory. "More than enough for a species at their level of development. We will begin with their outer colonies and work our way inward, just as protocol demands." She felt no hatred for the humans. Hatred was inefficient, a waste of mental resources better spent on tactical calculations. She simply saw them as a problem to be solved, a threat to be neutralized before it could grow beyond control. The fleet departed from Concorde space, beginning a journey that would take 30 years at faster-than-light speeds. 30 years during which humanity continued to grow, completely unaware of the doom approaching from the stars. On Earth, the year 2147 was a time of celebration and hope. The United Earth Council had approved the most ambitious project in human history, the colony ship Prometheus, designed to carry 50,000 souls to a distant world in the Kepler system. President Amara Okonkwo stood before the gathered crowd at the launch ceremony, her voice ringing with pride and optimism. "Today, we take another step into the unknown," she declared, gesturing toward the massive vessel that hung in orbit above them. "Today, we prove that nothing can stop humanity's journey to the stars. Not distance, not time, not any obstacle the universe can place in our path." The crowd cheered, waving flags and holding signs that proclaimed the dawn of a new era. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, eyes wide with wonder as they watched the ship that would carry their species further than ever before. No one looked toward the edge of the solar system. No one saw the darkness gathering there. No one knew that an armada of death was already on its way, that the silence of the stars was about to be broken by the thunder of war. Elena Vasquez watched the Prometheus depart from her post on Titan Relay Station, feeling a swell of pride in her chest. She had put her name in for the colony mission, but had not been selected. And part of her envied those 50,000 pioneers heading toward a new world. Beautiful, is it not? Her colleague asked, standing beside her at the observation window. "It is," Elena agreed, smiling. "It makes you believe that anything is possible." She could not know that in 30 years, she would be among the first to see the Concorde fleet emerge from faster-than-light travel. She could not know that her station would become the site of humanity's first contact with alien life, a contact written in fire and blood. For now, there was only hope, only the dream of a species reaching for the stars, unaware that the stars were reaching back with claws extended and teeth bared. The message had been sent, but it had never been received, and because of a solar storm and a tired technician's decision, two civilizations were now hurtling toward a collision that would shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. The year was 2177, and Commander Ithraini stood on the bridge of the Eternal Silence as her fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of human territory. 300 dreadnoughts materialized in perfect formation, their dark hulls drinking in the starlight like shadows giving form. Before them hung Titan Relay Station, humanity's outermost outpost, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that housed nearly 10,000 souls. Ithraini studied it on her tactical display with the cold interest of a predator examining prey. "Standard protocol," she ordered, her voice flat and emotionless. "Destroy the uninhabited moon to demonstrate our power. They will understand the message." Her weapons officer targeted a small moon, orbiting a nearby gas giant, and with a single burst of concentrated energy, the moon cracked apart like an egg struck by a hammer. Debris scattered across space in a spectacular display of destruction. Ithraney waited for the expected response. Panic, surrender broadcasts, pleas for mercy. She had seen it a dozen times before, the desperate begging of species that suddenly understood their place in the cosmic order. But the response that came was not what she expected at all. "Commander," her sensor officer reported, confusion evident in his voice. "We are detecting massive mobilization across all human systems. Thousands of ships are powering up their engines." Ithraney's eyes narrowed. This was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some species attempted to flee when faced with sterilization, and she had protocols for dealing with such situations. "They are not fleeing," the sensor officer continued, his voice rising with what might have been disbelief. "They are moving toward us. They are mobilizing for combat." On Titan Relay Station, Elena Vasquez had been the first to see the alien fleet appear. She had stared at her sensors for a long moment, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. 300 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, hanging in the darkness like harbingers of doom. Then she had watched them destroy a moon with a single shot, and she had understood exactly what they were. But Elena Vasquez was not the kind of woman who surrendered. She had grown up in the slums of New Snow Paulo, fighting for every scrap of food and every moment of safety. She had clawed her way into the fleet through sheer determination, and she had never backed down from a challenge in her life. "All stations battle alert," she shouted into her communicator. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command. We have hostile contact, and I want every ship in the system ready to fight." Across human space, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Cargo freighters were retrofitted with mining lasers in a matter of hours. Civilian transports were loaded with improvised explosives. Every ship capable of movement began racing toward the alien fleet. The first skirmish came 3 days later, when a squadron of 12 human destroyers engaged the outer picket of the Concorde fleet. Ithraney watched the engagement on her tactical display, expecting it to be over in seconds. The human ships were primitive, their weapons laughably weak compared to Concorde technology. Her destroyers vaporized all 12 vessels in less than a minute, their beams cutting through human armor like hot knives through soft butter. But then something strange happened. More human ships appeared, dozens of them, then hundreds. They poured out of faster-than-light travel in waves, their communications channels buzzing with activity. "What are they broadcasting?" Ithraney demanded. Her communications officer listened for a moment, then looked up with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Confusion mixed with something that might have been fear. "They are not broadcasting surrender requests," he said slowly. "They are transmitting evacuation coordinates for civilian ships and tactical data to their own military. They are organizing a counterattack." Ithraney felt something cold settle in her chest. In 12 sterilization campaigns, she had never seen anything like this. Species faced with Concorde firepower always broke, always surrendered, always begged for mercy that would never come. These humans were not breaking. They were fighting back. "Destroy them," she ordered, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "Continue the advance toward their inner systems." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Concorde had ever experienced. Human ships threw themselves at the dreadnoughts with suicidal fury, ramming into their shields and detonating their reactor cores. Civilian vessels packed with explosives dove into formation gaps, sacrificing their crews to take out Concorde escorts. For every human ship destroyed, 2 more appeared. They fought without regard for their own survival, without the careful calculations of acceptable losses that governed Concorde military doctrine. Ithraney captured a human pilot whose ship had been disabled, but not destroyed. She had the pilot brought to her interrogation chamber, expecting a broken creature ready to provide information in exchange for a quick death. The pilot was a young woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, her flight suit torn and her face bloody from the crash. She stood before Ithraini without trembling, without the submissive posture the commander had seen in countless prisoners before. "You were warned," Ithraini said, her translator converting her words into the human language. "Your species received the quarantine warning 50 years ago. You were ordered to halt your expansion." The pilot stared at her for a long moment, then did something that shocked Ithraini to her core. She laughed. It was not a laugh of madness or despair, but a genuine laugh of amusement, as if Ithraini had told a particularly funny joke. "Warning?" the pilot said, still chuckling despite the blood running down her face. "What warning?" "We never got any message from you or anyone else." Ithraini felt the cold in her chest spread. This was impossible. The warning was sent using universal mathematics, detectable by any species with basic sensor technology. "You are lying," she said, but doubt had crept into her voice. "I am not lying," the pilot replied, her laughter fading into a hard smile. "We never received any message. The first we knew of your existence was when your fleet appeared and blew up a moon." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with defiance. "And even if we had received your warning, even if we had known you were coming, do you really think that would have stopped us?" Ithraini had no answer. She had never needed one before. Every species she had faced had understood the futility of resistance, had accepted their fate with varying degrees of dignity. "We are human," the pilot continued, blood dripping from her split lip. "We do not surrender. We do not give up. We do not lie down and die because someone tells us to. That is not who we are." She grinned through her bloodied teeth, and Ithraini saw something in her eyes that she had never seen in any prisoner before. Not fear, not despair, but absolute, unshakable determination. "You want to kill us?" the pilot asked. "Then you had better be ready to fight for every inch of space, for every planet, for every single human life. Because we will make you pay for each one in blood." Ithraini dismissed the prisoner and returned to her bridge, her mind churning with thoughts she had never had before. She accessed the Concord archives, searching for any record of a species that had counterattacked a sterilization fleet. There were none. The concept did not exist in Concord military doctrine. The word for counterattack against overwhelming force did not exist in most galactic languages. She stood alone on her bridge, staring out at the stars where human ships continued to gather, their numbers growing with each passing hour. And for the first time in her long career, Commander Ithraini of the Concord sterilization fleet felt the unfamiliar sensation of doubt. She was not fighting a species. She was fighting something the galaxy had never encountered before, a civilization that did not know how to surrender, a race that would rather die fighting than live on their knees. And as she watched another wave of human ships emerge from faster-than-light travel, their weapons already charging, she realized that this campaign would be unlike anything the Concord had ever faced. The war that followed would be remembered for generations, spoken of in whispers across 10,000 worlds as the conflict that changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about survival and the limits of desperation. By the end of the first year, humanity had lost over 2 million soldiers and civilians. Their outer colonies had been burned to ash, their fleet reduced to a fraction of its original size. By any conventional measure, they were losing, and losing badly. Admiral Chen Wei stood in the war room on Mars, surrounded by exhausted officers and flickering holographic displays. The news was grim. Another colony fallen, another fleet destroyed, another million human lives snuffed out by Concord weapons. "We cannot win this war through conventional means," Admiral Chen said, his voice calm despite the desperation of their situation. "They outnumber us 10,000 to 1. They have technology we cannot match. Every battle we fight fairly, we lose." He looked around the room at the faces of humanity's military leadership. Men and women who had given everything to defend their species. "So we will not fight fairly," he continued. "We will not play by their rules. We will make them pay such a terrible price for our extinction that no species in this galaxy will ever attempt it again." And so the doctrine of spite was born. It was a simple philosophy built on a terrible foundation. If humanity was going to die, it would make sure the Concord remembered that death forever. Every human life would be sold at the highest possible price. Every colony would become a trap. Every retreat would be a chance to inflict maximum damage. The first test of the doctrine came at New Helsinki, a mining colony on the edge of human space. The Concord fleet approached expecting easy prey, another world to burn on their march toward Earth. What they found was a nightmare. The colonists had evacuated weeks before, leaving behind only volunteers. Who had chosen to stay? These men and women had spent those weeks turning their home into the largest bomb in human history, rigging the colony's reactor cores with modified detonation sequences. Commander Ithrani sent 50 ships to secure the colony. They landed troops, began their standard cleansing protocols, reported that resistance was minimal. Then the colonists triggered the reactors. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. 50 Concord ships vanished in an instant, along with every soldier they had deployed. The shockwave damaged another 30 vessels, leaving them crippled and helpless. For the first time in 8,000 years, the Concord experienced a strategic defeat. News of New Helsinki spread through the Concord like wildfire. Species that had watched the war with detached interest suddenly paid attention. This was not how primitive species were supposed to behave. This was not how sterilization campaigns were supposed to go. But humanity was just getting started. Scientists worked around the clock to develop new weapons, turning their creativity toward destruction with terrifying efficiency. Asteroid redirect systems were modified to launch rocks at Concord supply lines. Antimatter containment was weaponized to create suicide ships that could destroy vessels 100 times their size. The most controversial project was codenamed Pandora, a series of engineered plagues designed to jump between Concord species, spreading through their populations with devastating effect. Humanity had never used biological weapons against its own kind, had treaties and laws forbidding such horrors. But this was not war against their own kind. This was a fight for survival, against an enemy that wanted to erase them from existence. And humanity had decided that if they were going to die, they would take as many of their killers with them as possible. Admiral Chun presented the Pandora files to the United Earth Council, his face grim. "These weapons could kill billions," President Okonkwo said, her voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "We would become monsters. We would become survivors." Admiral Chun replied, "Or we would become extinct. Those are our only choices. The Concord has decided that we have no right to exist, so we must decide how much we are willing to sacrifice to prove them wrong." The Council authorized the project, though many of them could not meet each other's eyes afterward. Ambassador Velkrith watched the war unfold from Concord space, his horror growing with each passing month. He had voted to authorize the sterilization, had believed it to be a necessary act of galactic security. Now he wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. He requested permission to contact human leadership, to open a dialogue that might end the bloodshed. The Council denied his request, insisting that the sterilization must continue until completion. But Velkrath was old, and he had seen many things in his long life. He knew that sometimes rules must be broken for the greater good. He established a secret communication channel with Admiral Chun, reaching out across the void to the enemy he had helped create. "Why do you continue to fight?" Velcroth asked during their first conversation. "You cannot win. Your species will be destroyed. Surely you must see that resistance only prolongs the suffering." Admiral Chun's response was calm, almost philosophical. "Let me tell you something about humans," he said. "We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We have survived ice ages and plagues, famines and floods, wars that killed hundreds of millions. We have faced extinction before, many times, and we are still here." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting Velcroth's across the light years that separated them. "You see, our resistance is futile. We see it as inevitable. We do not know how to give up. It is not in our nature. You could kill 99% of humanity, and the survivors would crawl out of the ashes and start rebuilding." Velcroth struggled to understand. His species had evolved in a stable environment, had never faced true existential threats. The concept of fighting against impossible odds was foreign to his thinking. "You turned your own colony into a bomb," he said, unable to keep the horror from his voice. "What kind of species does that?" Admiral Chun smiled, but there was no joy in it. "The kind that refuses to die quietly." The war continued for 3 more years, and with each passing month, the cost of the Concord grew higher. Ships that should have been patrolling Concord borders were diverted to the human front. Resources that should have supported the Alliance were consumed by the endless fighting. Species began to question the wisdom of the campaign. The Valthari had promised a quick victory, a simple cleansing of a primitive threat. Instead, they had delivered a quagmire that drained blood and treasure without end. "They never even received our warning," one council member pointed out. "We are destroying a species for a crime they did not know they committed. The protocol is clear." Another replied, "Non-compliance must be punished, regardless of the reason." But the certainty that had once united the council was crumbling. Doubt had taken root, fed by the endless stream of casualty reports and the growing realization that humanity would not stop fighting until the last human was dead. The breaking point came at the Battle of Proxima, where human forces lured a Concord fleet into a carefully prepared trap. They had spent months seeding the system with hidden weapons platforms, autonomous drones, and modified asteroids. When the Concord fleet arrived, they found themselves surrounded by death. 200 ships were destroyed in the first hour, caught in crossfires from weapons they never saw coming. The survivors retreated in chaos, their formation shattered. It was the worst defeat in Concord military history, a humiliation that echoed through the halls of power and shattered the myth of Concord invincibility. The council called an emergency session. For the first time, voices called for an end to the campaign, not from mercy but from simple calculation. Humanity had proven that their extinction would cost more than it was worth. As the debate raged, Velcroth sat in silence, thinking about his conversations with Admiral Chun. He had begun to understand something about humanity, something that his fellow council members had not yet grasped. This species was not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to send a message. And if the Concord did not listen soon, that message would be written in so much blood that the galaxy would never forget it. The ceasefire offer arrived on a spring morning in 2183, transmitted through Ambassador Velcroth's secret channel to Admiral Chun. The Concord was willing to halt hostilities, to withdraw their fleet, to leave humanity in peace. It should have been cause for celebration. After 5 years of war, after millions of deaths, humanity had achieved the impossible. They had fought the greatest military power in the galaxy to a standstill. But when Admiral Chun brought the offer to the United Earth Council, the response was not what anyone expected. President Amara Okonkwo, who had aged 20 years in the five since the war began, read the terms carefully. The Concorde would withdraw. Humanity would be left alone, and both sides would pretend the war had never happened. "No," she said finally, setting down the document. The room fell silent. Advisors exchanged confused glances. General Morrison leaned forward, certain he had misheard. "Madam President, with respect, this is what we have been fighting for," he said. "They are offering us survival. They are offering us isolation," Okonkwo replied, her voice hard as steel. "They want to go back to the way things were, to forget that they tried to exterminate us, to pretend that the sterilization protocol does not exist." She stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the scarred landscape of Mars. Concorde bombs had fallen here, had turned thriving cities into craters. She could see the memorials from where she stood, the names of the dead carved into stone that stretched for miles. "If we accept this offer, nothing changes," she continued. "The Concorde will continue to destroy young species. They will send their warnings that may or may not be received, and when those species fail to respond, they will burn them, just as they tried to burn us." She turned back to face the council. "We did not fight this war just to survive. We fought it to matter. And if we stop now, we will have accomplished nothing except delaying our own extinction until they decide to try again." The debate lasted for days, but in the end, the council voted to reject the ceasefire. They would continue fighting, not for survival, but for something greater, the chance to change the galaxy itself. Admiral Chun sent their response to Volkrath, who received it with a mixture of horror and fascination. "You are rejecting peace?" he asked, struggling to comprehend. "Your species teeters on the edge of extinction, and you choose to continue the war?" "We are not just fighting for our lives anymore," Admiral Chun explained. "We are fighting for every species that will come after us, for every civilization that might face the same fate we did. The Concorde must learn that what they did was wrong, and they will not learn that lesson if we simply accept their offer to pretend it never happened." Velkrath had no response. In all his long years, he had never encountered a species that thought this way. Most civilizations cared only for their own survival, their own prosperity, their own continuation. Humanity was fighting for the future of species they would never meet, for worlds they would never see. It was either the most selfless thing he had ever witnessed or the most insane. The operation that followed was called Echo, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human forces launched simultaneous attacks across 100 systems, striking not at military targets, but at communication relays. These were the nodes that connected the Concorde, the network through which all galactic communication flowed. Within hours, humanity had seized control of the entire system. And then they began to broadcast. Every species in the Concorde, every world with a receiver capable of picking up the signal, suddenly found themselves watching humanity's story unfold. It was not propaganda, not carefully crafted messaging designed to make them look good. It was the truth. They showed the wars, the world wars that had killed tens of millions, the regional conflicts that had burned for generations, the civil wars and revolutions and genocides that scarred human history. They showed the plagues, the Black Death that had killed a third of Europe, the influenza that had swept the globe, the pandemics that had threatened to end civilization itself. They showed the famines and the floods, the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions, the ice ages that had nearly frozen their ancestors out of existence. They showed the Holocaust, the systematic murder of millions based on nothing but hatred and fear. They showed the collapse of 2089, when climate change and resource depletion had brought humanity to the edge of extinction. And they showed how humanity had survived it all. The broadcast lasted for 6 hours, and when it ended, a single message appeared, transmitted in every language the Concorde used. You tried to exterminate us because we did not answer your call. But we have been practicing extinction on ourselves for 10,000 years. We have faced every horror the universe can produce, and we are still here. We have killed ourselves in numbers you cannot imagine, and we are still here. We have poisoned our world, burned our cities, and turned our weapons on our own children, and we are still here. The message continued. You thought we were just another primitive species, too young and too foolish to survive. You were wrong. We are humanity, and we do not know how to die. The final words hung in the silence of 1,000 worlds. Your move. The psychological impact was devastating. Species that had considered themselves apex predators, the pinnacle of evolution, suddenly realized what they had awakened. The Kethmari, Commander Etherani's species, had evolved as perfect hunters. They had never faced a prey that fought back, had never imagined that such a thing was possible. Now they watched footage of human soldiers charging Concord positions with nothing but knives and determination, of civilian ships ramming dreadnoughts in suicide attacks, of children being trained to fight in the ruins of bombed cities. They treat their own extinction as a recoverable setback, a Kethmari analyst reported, his voice trembling. Their history shows dozens of events that should have ended their species, and each time they emerge stronger. They do not fear death because they have faced it so many times that it has lost its power over them. Ambassador Velcroth addressed the Concord Council, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. We sent them a warning they never received, he said, looking around at the faces of representatives who had voted for humanity's destruction. They have sent us one we can never forget. He gestured to the displays that still showed images from the human broadcast. Cities rising from ruins, populations recovering from plagues, civilizations rebuilding after wars that should have been the end. We thought we were teaching them a lesson about power, he continued. Instead, they have taught us a lesson about survival. They have shown us that true strength is not the ability to destroy, but the refusal to be destroyed. The council sat in stunned silence. For 8,000 years, they had believed themselves to be the masters of the galaxy. They had created the sterilization protocol because they feared what young species might become if allowed to grow unchecked. Now they understood that their fear had been justified, but not in the way they had expected. Humanity was not a threat because of their weapons or their technology. They were a threat because they simply refused to stop existing. The vote that followed was unanimous. The Concord would not just offer peace. They would offer humanity membership in the Concord itself. They would bring these terrifying, wonderful, unstoppable creatures into the fold. Because if they could not destroy humanity, they had better learn to live with them. As the decision was announced, Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of his flagship and allowed himself a small smile. They had not just survived. They had changed the galaxy. Now came the hard part, deciding what kind of change they wanted to be. The year was 2185, and Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood at the entrance to the Concord Assembly Hall, the greatest gathering of intelligent life in the known galaxy. Behind her stood a delegation of 20 humans, the first of their species to set foot in this ancient chamber. 4,000 species watched as she walked to the podium reserved for new members. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with fear, and more than a few with barely concealed hostility. These were the species that had voted for humanity's extinction, and they had not forgotten that they had failed. Tanaka was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes, but she carried herself with a dignity that filled the massive hall. She had been a historian before the war, had spent her life studying the rise and fall of civilizations. Now she would help determine the future of her own. We accept your invitation to join the Galactic Concord, she announced, a translator carrying her words to every corner of the chamber. But we have conditions. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. New species did not make demands. They accepted membership gratefully and spent centuries proving their worth before earning the right to speak in council debates. But humanity had already proven their worth in blood and fire, and everyone in that chamber knew it. We demand a complete review of the sterilization protocol, Tanaka continued. The policy that nearly destroyed us must be examined, and its victims must be remembered. She raised her hand, and holographic displays flickered to life throughout the chamber. They showed worlds, beautiful, diverse, filled with the potential for life and civilization. These are the planets of the Volhorath, Tanaka said. They were a young species, barely beginning to explore their home system when the Concord detected them. They received your warning, but did not understand it. Their mathematics had developed differently from yours, and they could not decode the message. She changed the display. These are the worlds of the Kethanari. They received your warning and responded with enthusiasm, trying to establish contact. But their communication technology was incompatible with yours, and their messages were interpreted as hostility. Display after display appeared, each one showing the remnants of a civilization that had been erased from existence. 31 species in total, their names preserved only in Concord records as entries in a ledger of the dead. 31 species, Tanaka said, her voice heavy with emotion. 31 civilizations with their own histories, their own cultures, their own dreams. All of them destroyed because they could not hear you, or could not understand you, or could not respond in the way you expected. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had voted for those extinctions. You built a system designed to destroy anyone who did not answer you, she continued. You never considered that some species could not hear, others could not understand, and some of us just needed time to grow. Her voice rose, filling the vast space with words that would be repeated across the galaxy for generations to come. How many civilizations did you erase who might have been your greatest allies? How many scientists and artists, philosophers and explorers were lost because you were too afraid to wait, too arrogant to consider that you might be wrong? The chamber fell silent. Tanaka let the silence stretch, letting her words sink into minds that had never been forced to confront the consequences of their policies. We do not blame you for attacking us, she said finally. We understand fear. We have lived with it all our lives. We understand the desire to protect yourself from threats you do not understand. She spread her hands, encompassing the entire assembly in her gesture. But we will not let you continue as you have been. The sterilization protocol must end. Young species must be given the chance to grow, to learn, to join you as equals, rather than being destroyed for the crime of being different. The debate that followed lasted for weeks. Species that had supported the protocol for millennia defended it as necessary for stability. Others, shaken by humanity's revelations, called for its immediate abolition. In the end, the vote was close, but the protocol was abolished by a margin of just over 60%. It was not a unanimous victory, but it was enough. Humanity was appointed to lead a new initiative, the First Contact Doctrine Committee. Their task was to develop new ways of communicating with young species, methods that would work across all forms of mathematics and technology. Admiral Chun, who had been offered the position of military advisor to the Concord, accepted instead a role as consultant to the committee. He had spent 5 years learning how to fight aliens, and now he would spend the rest of his life learning how to welcome them. We cannot guarantee that we will reach every species, he admitted to the committee. But we can guarantee that we will try, that we will give them every chance to hear us before we make any decisions about their future. Ambassador Velkrath became the committee's strongest supporter among the elder species. The Valthari, who had once voted for humanity's extinction, was now their most vocal advocate. He had requested permission to visit Earth, to see the world that had produced such remarkable creatures. The request was granted, and he descended through blue skies to land on the soil of humanity's homeworld. Earth was scarred but recovering. The war had touched even this most protected of human worlds, leaving craters where cities had stood and memorials where millions had died. But flowers grew in the ruins, and children played in parks that had been battlefields just years before. Velkrith visited the memorial at Titan Relay Station, now preserved as a museum to the first contact between human and Concord. Elena Vasquez herself served as his guide, the woman who had been the first to see his people's fleet and had refused to surrender. They walked in silence through halls filled with artifacts of the war, weapons and uniforms, photographs and recordings, the names of the dead inscribed on walls that seemed to stretch forever. A child approached them as they stood before a display of the original quarantine warning, the message that had started it all. She was young, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair and curious eyes. "Excuse me," she said, looking up at Velkrith with the fearlessness of youth. "My teacher said you are one of the aliens who tried to kill us. Is that true?" Velkrith felt his heart clench. He had faced human warriors in battle, had watched his ships burn in the fires of their desperate resistance, but nothing had prepared him for the simple honesty of a child's question. He knelt to her level, bringing his large gray eyes even with her small brown ones. "Yes," he said, because he had learned that humans valued truth above comfort. "My people voted to destroy yours. We thought you were a threat that needed to be eliminated." The child tilted her head, considering his answer with surprising gravity. "Why?" she asked. "Because we were afraid," Velkrith admitted. "We were afraid of what you might become, of what you might do if we let you grow too powerful. We had seen young species cause great destruction before, and we thought it was better to stop them before they could hurt anyone." "That seems mean," the child said, with the simple moral clarity that only children possess. "You should have just talked to us instead." Velkrith felt something shift in his chest, an emotion he did not have a name for. "You were right," he said. "We should have. We were wrong, and many people died because of our mistake." The child nodded, accepting his apology with the ease of youth. "My daddy died in the war," she said. "Mommy says he was a hero." "He was," Velkrith replied, his voice thick with feeling. "All of your people were heroes. You fought for your right to exist, and you won. The galaxy will never forget what you accomplished." The child seemed satisfied with this answer. She reached out and touched Velkrith's hand, her small fingers pale against his gray skin. "It is okay," she said. "I forgive you." And with those 3 words, she walked away to rejoin her classmates, leaving Velkrith kneeling on the floor of the memorial, undone by the simple grace of a child's forgiveness. Elena Vasquez helped him to his feet, her expression unreadable. "Children are like that," she said. "They forgive easily. It is one of the best things about them." Velkrith watched the child disappear into a group of her peers, human children who would grow up in a galaxy, forever changed by their species' refusal to die. "You asked me once why we kept fighting," Elena said. "I told you it was because we do not know how to surrender. But that was only part of the truth." She gestured to the children, to the memorial, to the world outside that was slowly healing from the scars of war. "We kept fighting because we believed in tomorrow," she continued. "We believed that the future was worth fighting for, that our children deserved a chance to grow up in a galaxy that was better than the one we inherited." Velkrith nodded slowly, understanding at last. Humans were not just survivors. They were dreamers. They fought not just for what was, but for what could be. "And now?" he asked. "What do you believe now that the war is over?" Elena smiled, the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her. "Now I believe that the future will be better than any of us can imagine. Because you are part of it, and we are part of it. And together, We will build something that neither of our species could have built alone." Velkrith looked up at the stars, visible now through the memorial's transparent dome. Out there, somewhere, a young species was taking its first steps into space.